So let's see in this video what effect a vertical shift has on my tangent graph. Here I have, in this example, where I want to graph y is equal to 1 minus tan x, and again I'm going to do this over 3 periods. So just like before, we're going to start by identifying what b is, so that's our first step. In this case, b is the coefficient that's next to x, and that's a 1. So if b is 1, then the period of this function is just pi, because period is pi over b. The second thing I want to do is I want to determine what the asymptotes of this function are. Remember also that asymptotes for tangent are determined or found by bx is negative pi over 2, solving this equation, and bx is positive pi over 2. Since b in each of these cases is just 1, then my first set of vertical asymptotes that I'm looking at are occurring at negative and positive pi over 2. The third thing I want to determine is if there's a phase shift, and since I don't have any values that I'm adding or subtracting inside of the function here, then I don't have a phase shift. But what do I have next? Well, either way you want to look at this, I'm going to just look at this negative sign right here. If I want to determine, because I usually like to draw a value along the y-axis, so in other words, a is equal to 1, but that negative sign in front of the trig function means that this whole thing is going to be flipped or reflected across the x-axis. And finally we get to the vertical shift. This is a number that is being added or subtracted to the trig function, and therefore that means I will shift either up or down, and in this case, since 1 is positive, I'm going to be shifting up by 1. So I'm going to take my x-axis and shift it up by 1, and we'll get to that in just a second. So let's come down here and let's draw what we've got so far. Drawing the x and the y-axis, I know that my first set of vertical asymptotes are going to occur between negative and positive pi over 2. So that's going to be here. So that'll be negative and positive pi over 2. But since I want to draw 3 periods, I'm going to move to the right of this by a period of pi, which means I'm going to add 1 to it, and I get positive 3 pi over 2. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to subtract pi and get negative 3 pi over 2. So in each of these points, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw my vertical asymptotes. Drawing those here, and I'm going to come back in and I'm going to fill out the other point that I'm interested in, which is the midpoint in between those vertical asymptotes. So halfway between negative 3 pi over 2 and negative pi over 2 is just negative pi. Halfway between negative and positive pi over 2 is 0, and halfway between this next set of asymptotes is just pi. So I have where the graph is going to, or where my function is going to cross the x-axis. I have my vertical asymptotes listed. I know that I would normally put, let's see, a positive and a negative 1 on this graph. And I know that my function will be flipped. In other words, instead of this function coming up and increasing from the left, crossing and moving off, we're going to actually start top, decrease, cross, and go down. But I'm not quite there yet because I need to address the vertical shift here. Since the entire graph has been shifted up by 1, I'm going to come in and I am going to draw another x-axis, kind of an imaginary x-axis, let's say, here at 1, because that's where I have shifted everything. And I want to do that because that's going to help me cross or make my, I don't know, hooky-doo, my little cross over here, effective up here at the right point. So when I graph this function again, I know that this function is flipped. I know that it's going to decrease and it will cross here. So it's going to come down, cross, and then move off in the negative direction. And on the next period, it's going to come down, cross, and move off again. And here again I cross, so I'm going to come down, cross, and go in that direction. So you can see that that vertical shift moved all of these direction changes, I guess, or these kind of shifts, not direction changes, but shifts in my tangent function. It moved that entire picture up. And so it was important for me to draw this kind of imaginary x-axis up here so that I could make the correct picture be shown by graphing this using translations is what I'm doing.